Well, welcome to session 16D, exciting session entitled Trusted AI. And then the subtitle to that is Data Executives are Building an Ethical Foundation for Artificial Intelligence. So a great topic, very much on the minds of everyone. Looking forward to hearing from our panel of folks here, and I'm going to hand over to Allyson to introduce herself and the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much. John, if you can move us forward. Thank you for participating in our session today. As indicated, we're going to be talking a lot about AI, both the capabilities and some of the really interesting opportunities we have, as well as the risk and governance and what that means. Director in KPMG's Digital Lighthouse, which is our data and analytics COE. I focus primarily on our data governance solutions, as well as spending a lot of time with our financial services clients. So Sreekar, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Allyson. Hello, everyone. I'm Sreekar Krishna. I'm one of the partners at KPMG. As Allyson said, part of the Digital Lighthouse, which is our AI capability center of excellence. Also a faculty at Arizona State University, focusing a lot on the combination of AI and business and how we should advance this forward. Bob?
And Bob Parr, I'm the U.S. Chief Data Officer for our advisory practice. And my focus is really helping make our firm more data and insights driven. So it's a similar portfolio to what many of you have out there in the audience. So it was a chance for me to come out of practice and really practice what we preach by taking some of those approaches internally. So it's been a very rewarding experience doing that. Thanks.
So at a high level, we're going to spend the next hour or so walking you through, starting with the risks and the governance of advanced AI and these technologies and where they're going. We'll then shift into a bit of the opportunities and capabilities around advanced AI, and then the ethical impacts of that, and how do we manage those algorithms as they become more complex. And as I said, we'll wrap up with a call to action for the data executive. And you'll hear that message, as Bob said, from a data executive himself. So let's jump in. So we'll start with the risks. When we think about AI, and specifically when we talk about the risks associated with it, historically, it's really been focused on that reputational risk or customer satisfaction, very much sort of externally focused. But as AI capabilities have proliferated, and we've seen this especially now coming out of the pandemic, and that really focus on the digital agenda, the associated risks have also expanded. So in addition to the reputational risks, we're also looking at legal and financial implications. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about today the regulation perspective, but there's also obviously regulatory risks associated with that. Additionally, as again, things have proliferated now, as we think about the impacts to both our organization internally, the risks externally have also grown as we think about how AI is impacting our communities and impacting the individual in those communities. When we talk about risks, we group them into 4 categories. So let's start with resilience. And really, resiliency risk speaks to the robustness of your AI capabilities across the platforms and its resistance to bad actors. So what we mean by bad actors are things like cyber risk, but also you hear in the news quite a bit around internet trolls, for example, that may be out there trying to train or trick your AI models into performing in unexpected ways. We think about fairness, and we'll talk to this quite a bit today as well, that freedom from bias, right? And what does that mean? That prejudice and looking at both from an algorithm side, as well as from the data itself. So making sure that protected data isn't used, that the data that's being used to train the models doesn't have unintended bias within it as well. The third category, integrity, again, encompasses both the algorithm and the integrity of the algorithm and the integrity of the data itself. So are we using that data appropriately, and are we able to trace it back to ensure that its validity and it's meant for that type of purpose? The fourth category then, as we think about explainability, this is really the transparency to the model outcome, right? Are we able to explain the decision-making process of the AI technology in simple terms? This has obviously gotten more complicated as the AI systems have gotten more sophisticated, resulting in oftentimes explainability outcomes that appear more ambiguous than we would like. So let's talk about then, as we think about what organizations are doing or should be doing related to these risks. I'm going to start a little bit with some interesting data points. So KPMG has done quite a bit of surveys and looking at the market and what organizations are doing in this space. And even between the 2020 survey and the 2021 survey, we're seeing some interesting trends. So, if you think about over the last several years, really the focus around data and analytics governance has been on protection, right? The security and privacy agendas. Not surprisingly, heavily driven by the regulators, and the regulators are responding in kind with things like GDPR, CCPA here in the US as well. But when we start looking at where organizations have been focusing in 2021, we're starting to see a shift. So where here on the screen, we show the financial services example in 2020, they were 72% of respondents said that security and privacy were top of mind. Fast forward to this year, that number has dropped pretty significantly if we think about a year-over-year timeframe, down to 49%. We see similar results in the tech sector as well. And it's not to say that privacy and security aren't important. We know they still are. But I think it's also reflective of that other risks now exist, and the awareness of those risks have certainly grown. So the organizations are taking a more balanced approach to AI governance. What we've seen is, one back, please. Thank you. Executives are nearly unanimous in saying that companies really should implement ethics policies as it relates to governing their AI capabilities. That's one way that this change in focus has been manifested. And specifically when we look at IT decision makers, we've seen 87% of those folks surveyed believe that there is a need for AI regulation as well. But recognizing that the regulators are moving at their traditional pace, organizations are taking it upon themselves to address these AI concerns without waiting for the requirements to be forced upon them. You'll see here in the bottom left, really industrial manufacturing and retail are leading that charge and have made the most progress, but we're seeing movement across all industries in a significant way. All right, now you can move me forward, please. Thank you. So what does that look like? We've seen, we're looking across AI and it's introducing new and different risks, but that's not to say that the governance is really significantly different from what we've done in the past. Much like data governance that we've been talking about for years, the AI governance models need to be flexible, but they also need to be broad and woven into your existing corporate governance capabilities. So first, really it's about establishing the design criteria and controls, recognizing that we want to foster responsible innovation. So we don't want to swing too far to that pendulum of control, and also want to keep an eye toward flexibility in our development. The approach needs to look at the entire AI lifecycle. If you look at the 4 risks that we were talking about, right, the resiliency, fairness, integrity, explainability, those don't happen at one step in the development lifecycle. They're really crossing the entire circuit. So in order for that to be managed, you really have to look at AI governance throughout the life cycle, from design and how the models are being built all the way through to the ongoing operation and execution. As I said, assessing and leveraging your current governance frameworks is critical. AI governance should not be a bolt-on. It doesn't need to sit off to the side. It really needs to be part of that everyday vernacular, just like data was, several years ago. The proliferation of AI capabilities across the organization mean that the existing governance frameworks need to take into consideration what's being done in this space. You also want to enable this responsible delivery as much as you can through things like templates, accelerators, tools. We want to make it as easy as possible in our governance framework to align to the standards that you're putting in place. And this includes both for the consumption of AI, as well as for the developers and the folks that are creating the models and implementing them. When we look about the risk management framework, like all governance, we also want to make sure that we're prioritizing appropriately. And so that is looking at your business critical algorithms, as well as the risk mitigation strategies that are being built for those algorithms. AI governance, like all governance, is not going to be one size fits all. So we want to make sure that you have a prioritization framework in place, aligned based on the degree of risks exist. And again, this is also going to help you keep from having that pendulum swing too far to the right or to the left, and really take a very pragmatic approach to governance. And lastly, we need to think about continuous control over these algorithms. So unlike some of the more traditional technologies and implementations that we're all familiar with, AI models can drift over time. So because they're constantly learning and evolving, there is that opportunity as the underlying data changes, as the business processes are being updated, that's generating that data. There's a possibility that those models and the outcomes of those models are going to shift. Now, sometimes that's intended, right? That's the point of the learning models. But we want to recognize that it may be happening in a way that we didn't intend. And we want to make sure that we're guarding against that. So it is important that you look at not just from the point of implementation, but you have this continuously monitoring and human in the loop process as you think about governance in an AI space. So before we shift over into Sreekar and his talk on the capabilities, just want to ground everyone a little bit in how this fits into the path to value. So if for those of you that were able to attend our presentation last year, hopefully this looks familiar to you. As we think about the accelerated growth of AI coming out of the pandemic, the focus from foundation building has shifted even faster than previously anticipated into this insights generation and new business model creation that we're seeing in the right-hand side, kind of the upper right of this path. And for those reasons, AI governance really needs to keep up, and that pace needs to shift. So I will now hand it over to Sreekar to discuss the opportunities that hopefully, as that governance is in place, you can generate through AI.
Thank you, Allyson. And exactly like what Allyson was saying, right? Like we are doing survey with our clients and with different industries every year. And what we saw in the last 2 years has been like a dramatic shift in both on the opportunity side as well as the risk side. And Allyson covered some of the key areas that our clients are looking at it, and we see industry moving in that direction. But I just wanted to take a moment to tell the audience that we are seeing AI add a lot of value to the organization. I will cover a few of those areas. But the key 4 things that we saw coming out of our survey and also the work that we are doing with our clients, what we are seeing is the algorithmic data insights, if you can say so. I mean, without using the word AI over and over again, the algorithmic insights are now kind of penetrating pretty much across the organization. In the initial era of AI, we saw a lot of success in the front office. But that success did not translate into back office and middle office. Like, if you think about sales, procurement, human resources. But recently what we have seen is there's a huge success in AI in all of these areas, with which it has also brought up a lot of different questions about ethical considerations, risks to the organization, and decision making, which has become very tough now in this new environment. This has obviously, resulted, and I think most of you guys are probably aware, the surge in the explainability movement, which has come front and center. The opportunity that we see is there's a whole new set of tools that are coming into this space, which is increasing the explainability of various types of algorithms. It's also increasing the awareness across the organizations to understand and ask about bias and risk and the what if scenarios. What are the risks within the algorithms? How do we take care of those? And this is a good movement as we see, because now we are getting more tools in our tool chain that we can explore these opportunities front and center. I mean, like most of you guys, I mean, what we have seen is this pandemic-driven digital transformation. It definitely, what it did is it deprioritized the stopgap solutions that the clients were building. And this is a huge opportunity, if you ask me, primarily because clients were having a roadmap before. Organizations were putting a roadmap on which they were trying to move different attributes of their digital transformation. And AI was always a backfiller. That meant that a lot of the architectural designs that were required for the success of an algorithm were getting put on the back burner. Now, with the pandemic-driven acceleration, what we are seeing is a lot of these curiosities that were there in the organizations have really turned into opportunities. What were originally, like a 2-year, 3-year roadmap to get your training labels in, to get a data operation set up, to really put in AI governance, they have all accelerated, and institutions are investing into these key areas. Last but not least, what we are also seeing is the productivity changes that have happened because of remote work. Institutions are asking, how can algorithms assist as well as be able to improve the productivity of their workforce without putting the stress on them that, especially in the new hybrid model that probably 90% of you guys are thinking about, what is the productivity gain that AI can bring to bear? IT, for example, is really exploring how to reduce their time to operations, time to response, increasing productivity across the board. And obviously, all of these opportunities comes with their own ethical considerations and risks. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, and Bob will cover how we think we need to have a holistic sense of literacy around ethics across organizations. Let's go to the next one, John. Before I move on, me being an academic in the AI space, I love the improvements that have happened in all across the board. GPT-3, great example of something that has come to add real value to what organizations can achieve. I mean, for those who are familiar, this is the best thing that has happened to AI researchers in terms of having all of these capabilities come through. But if you see from an ethical and an technology rollout standpoint, what we are seeing is that we need to govern these models really well. These are very complex models. I mean, I have another example here of a Mokogan, which basically is like an adversarial network, deep neural net that is able to do some really cool computer vision algorithms. And what we are seeing is that our clients and also in broad AI space, they are adopting these technologies as they become available. And these are adding really new paths to value for algorithms and for AI. In an contextual space previously, what we saw was that front office was using these algorithms very rapidly, but the middle office, like procurement and sales team and HR and all of these guys were somewhat left behind. And with these new technologies now, what we are able to do is to provide them a huge productive gain in their own business process without really requiring them to have to change their entire operations. And those capabilities are really starting to come to bear. And you see a graph on the bottom right. This is from our survey that we did with various industries. Obviously, IT is seeing a huge benefit with AI. AI ops, for example, has become very big. DevOps has started to incorporate algorithms in order to accelerate their DevOps processes and how quickly we can release that to production, all of those capabilities. And you can see, like, as we keep going down in the, in that bar graph, you will see human resources and finance all the way at the bottom. That is a huge area where we are seeing that there is a gap. And there are new tools that are coming in, but also institutions are starting to use a combination of buy and build in order to address those gaps. And what we are seeing is, both as KPMG and also as a faculty at ASU, I see that the desire for CXOs to really talk about this path to value with algorithms has rapidly increased. IT was front and center. They already had their capabilities put in place, so they were able to adopt this faster. But now we are seeing the rise of all of these other CXOs who are starting to do the same. Let's go to the next one, John. So really, if you think about it, pandemic was a true catalyst in this AI adoption movement, and we saw that happening across the board. Previously, AI for a lot of our clients was a experiment on a shelf, and they would just do this thing, and they will be like, okay, we also did AI. Versus now, what we are seeing is that a huge swath of people are coming forward, and they're saying we have started to adopt all of these technologies in a really strong way. Right, 79% of the executives that we talked to, they said that they are using AI functionally, in a moderate way, but 43% of our survey results say that they are actually using AI systems fully at scale. And obviously, it depends on whether you consider AI as a component of a tool that is already there in your tool chain, or do you consider it as something that you have built for your own custom build purposes. There is a huge variance in that area. But year on year, when we see what happened the year before in 2020, we were way behind in terms of adoption of these technologies. Now what we're seeing is there is a rapid rise in this adoption, and there is also an resulting challenges that we are starting to see, and that is primarily what is driving a lot of our conversations with our clients about ethics and bias and how do we address all of those things. What's the literacy side of all of this? We cannot expect an AI algorithm to just go be a black box solution. How do we increase the ability for the human and the algorithm to interact with one another? We are seeing challenges in solution adaptability with their workforce, especially around operating models. The operating models are under severe stress. Multiplied by the current labor shortage in the market, and also the labor churn in the market, we are seeing a lot of institutions struggling to get that operating model right. Transparency with the AI algorithms are definitely something that is starting to become a hindrance to growth, if I can say so. And last but not least, AI skills, which was already in there was a huge demand issue, but now with all of the stuff that's happening with digital transformation and advancements of all of the digital technologies, now AI skills are in, there's a huge shortage in the market. Let's go to the next one, John. So really, when we think about all of these things, the key factors that CDOs are starting to think about is definitely the governance of these solutions. Like Allyson said, we need to think about this in a continuous manner. We need to think about the life cycle of these algorithms as they go through. What we are seeing institutions are going through, there's a huge struggle in the approach itself. If you spent any time with the financial services industry like we do at KPMG, model management was there for a long period of time. And we are seeing institutions now struggling with, is AI the same as model governance? Is it different? Should we be taking care of data also? Because, as we all know, you put garbage in, you get garbage out from these algorithms. How do we manage that data? So the same back and forth between data first, algorithms next, or algorithms first, data next, is starting to become a huge push and pull for a lot of our clients. Gaining that trust around AI is still a huge challenge. A lot of questions come through, and especially this goes back to what I was saying about literacy. It cannot be that you go away and build the algorithm in a workshop and just bring it out and put it into the operating model. This requires a lot of hand-holding, both from the business leaders as well as from the folks that will be using these algorithms on a day-to-day basis, which means you are now asking about a change in the operating structure. You're talking about a change in training program. You're talking about literacy. So all of these things are coming back around, and now the leaders are asking, how do we put this thing in place, and how do we continue to maintain that as these algorithms evolve within the organization? And adapting to new policies as they come through, especially around AI regulations. A lot of institutions are worried about AI regulations. And, before the pandemic, many institutions, they said, we're going to wait it out. We're going to wait and see what happens, so that way we are not redoing this. But then the pandemic threw in a wrench in that plan, and it basically made them accelerate their programs, which means you are no longer waiting to watch and see what happens on the regulation side. You have to become adaptable to these regulations. So which means your operating structure is again being brought into question. We are talking about literacy again, about how do we keep ahead of the curve when it comes to regulations, especially when we are piecemealing regulations within states, within countries, which is within jurisdictions. This is a huge challenge. And in defining who is accountable when an AI algorithm makes a mistake, or maybe not a mistake, it makes a prediction. Who is responsible for that prediction? I mean, I know we have seen this predicament with driverless cars. It's the same problem that is coming up, especially when you go into the back office and start using algorithms within, say, HR. How do we assign responsibility to these algorithms, and who takes care of them? And last but not least, and this is something that is, that's been going on for some time, which is how do we build technology that can address these ethical issues and risks in a scalable manner? Because if you think about an organization and every aspect of the organization moving really fast to digital transformation and adopting AI capabilities, how do we let technology lead the charge and make it scalable as we go? So these are some of the areas that we are really seeing that, there's a governance play that is coming into AI. And it's definitely an opportunity game, but at the same time, what we're seeing is that there is a need for a new paradigm in thinking around AI, and which I'll use as a stepping stone into the next portion of this presentation. We have all heard about supervising algorithms, right? I mean, supervised algorithms, unsupervised algorithms. Do we really need to start parenting our algorithms? This is something that we have been talking to a lot of our industry partners and to our clients. And I'll let's go to the next slide, John, and I'll try to differentiate between this, right? Algorithm upkeep is an evolving process. And, when we think about, I, as an AI researcher, way back 20 years back when we were building algorithms, we looked at it, in a rather simplistic way about supervising the algorithms. And if I can draw similarities between, the normal day operations of an institution, supervision is about productivity. It's about training the person. It's about helping the person, gain footing within the organization. Contrast that with parenting. Parenting is a lot more of moral building, building ethical capabilities, building the social dynamics, building and protecting the virtue of somebody who makes a decision. So what we are starting to see is that our algorithms are going into places within organizations where there is a lot of need for moral, ethical, social decisioning. And we really think that there is a need for going beyond the supervision to really addressing this broader topic of how do we let algorithms evolve within an organization as the organization evolves. So this requires a lot more than just supervision. We cannot just expect that we'll take a bunch of training data points and we'll throw at an algorithm and we will hope that the algorithm learns all of these data points. We really have to provide those moral, social backing to these algorithmic data points. How do we do that? That is a huge challenge. I mean, the industry is not even looking at these broader capabilities yet. I mean, if you think about it, our key performance indicators for most of the algorithms, they really focus only on the algorithm's performance, what's its accuracy, what is its F-score, and does it suit the business need. How do we make sure that the algorithm is evolving constantly and it is keeping hold of all of these other ethical impact issues? That's another huge thing that we need to worry about. And that's not happening within institutions. We are doing point-in-time measurements, and we are allowing these algorithms to get into production if they meet a certain set of KPIs, and those KPIs need to improve over time in order to address all of these requirements. And if you see where the divide today exists, technology and business still are struggling with the same set of challenges that they've struggled with when they had the traditional technologies. Technical groups are really focused on the engineering behind these algorithms, and the business groups are really worried about getting the value from these AI algorithms. At that point, it is a real challenge as to delineating who holds the KPIs for this evolving standard around the AI. Who holds the KPIs that, if we had a data scientist who trained a model and now the data scientist is replaced by somebody else, that they continue to maintain that evolution of this AI's capabilities, especially the moral, ethical, and the social side of it. And the rise of the whole ESG movement that is going on, the environment and the social governance. ESG is really asking institutions to think about all of these nuances. How do we bring that into the framework of AI? How do we bring that into that evolving standard for AI? That's where we see that we need beyond supervision. We need parenting for these algorithms. And how do we build that into the operating model of the institution is something that we are really focused on. We are helping a lot of our clients think through that and really advance this to the next level. Let's go to the next slide, John. So if you, I was talking about parenting versus supervising, and, these are some of the early thoughts that we have thinking through how we differentiate between these two. When do we really need to think about an algorithm requiring more than just training labels? That's when you really start to think about parenting. I mean, HR is a great example of a location where we cannot say an algorithm can make a decision, even in prioritizing who should be hired or who should be given a bonus or who's a low performer. We cannot have that conversation without looking at how the algorithm has evolved over time. We cannot take point-in-time models and put it there and expect that the point-in-time models will evolve with the changes that have happened to the institution. Now, the same way, if you think about the responsibility, when an algorithm makes a decision, a parenting kind of talks about taking the responsibility for the algorithmic decision. Supervision, on the other hand, thinks about it more like, well, the training labels did not have that, the IID. If there is a technical audience here, we all talk about IID, right? Identical distributions from where we have taken our training samples as well as our testing samples. Most of the times in real world, nothing follows the IID principles. I mean, we see all kinds of problems with data. How do we assign responsibility, especially when there is a problem in the decision of the algorithm? That is something that we really we have to start focusing on as an institutional thinking around making AI, grow within the organization and evolve within the organization. And there is a huge need for softening that human to machine interaction boundary, right? I mean, today, if you think about human to algorithm interaction, we have data scientists. I mean, and I, as a recovering data scientist myself, I think that there is an weird expectation mismatch on both sides of the game. Data scientists think that, they will walk into an institution, they will have the data available, they'll have training labels available, they can train an algorithm because the institution has done the due diligence in curating the data in the right way. And then you got the expectation mismatch on the side of the executives, where they think that a data scientist can come in, take a swath of data and kind of convert it into answers that they're looking for. This interaction between algorithms and the business leaders is not very soft. It is very rough today, and we see a lot of churn happen on both sides, the data scientist side as well as the business side, when it comes to AI, because we haven't softened the corners when it comes to the interaction between the two. And how this assigns to parenting is, we need responsible ways in which this AI is deployed within the organization, having C-level commitments to maintaining and curating this sense of responsibility within the institution, and allowing the data scientists and the data engineers of tomorrow to feel like the institution is culturally aligned to evolving algorithms as they go. We have seen this happen in many institutions. That alignment is not there, and that cultural tracking is not there to allow growth to happen. And finally, what can we learn from our own human learning experiences, right? I know there are a lot of researchers out there who are looking into how human brain thinks and how we learn and everything. But there is a huge need for us to think about how a human learns. What are the moral and social principles they bring to table when they come into an organization before they get supervised, and try to help algorithms to go the same way. John, let's go to the next slide. And I know I'm speaking about a lot of philosophical capabilities here, but what we have seen is there is a tangible pathway to executing this. There is a tangible pathway to start to use governance principles, ethics principles that we have used for various other parts of the organization, to apply that to parenting algorithms and allowing AI to grow within organizations. I won't go too far into the details. I mean, there are 6 steps that we are proposing to help our clients go through these things. We have to start with a good strategy. A lot of institutions where we go in, we see there is no strategy when they start with AI. We need to have our operating model and governance principles laid out. Responsibility and accountability across algorithms is very important. So the RACI is there. And the governance frameworks goes across all the way from end to end. So we know the decision framework is there. Risks of algorithms should be thought through and should be measured. So that way, C-level through the folks executing it know where to go. And all of these things should be scalable. So that way we can keep moving fast as this area changes and adapt to its time. So with that, I'll let Bob jump in and talk about some of the capabilities that we are putting in place to help our clients and our industry partners go through this.
Thanks, Sreekar. So I want to start with, what does all this mean for data executives? During the conference, there's been a lot of discussion and numerous examples that illustrate, how organizations handle data and what we do with it, through algorithms is just a huge part of how organizations are really perceived and trusted. In fact, when you look at some of the research, and not just KPMG's, but Edelman did a trust barometer, and other research, corroborates that, when we look at the brand and organizational trust, it tends to be driven not just by perceived competence, but instead by perceived and demonstrated integrity. In short, ethics. So, at KPMG, we believe very strongly that organizations that understand how to do this well will really have a clear advantage in the market. But let's face it, I mean, we're all, as data professionals, we tend to like structure. And this is an area, AI and data ethics can be more than a little bit squishy. In some cases, it can feel a little academic. But regardless, we as a community, I really think need to embrace this strongly. Sreekar referenced thriving in an AR world and the survey we did around that. And there's really 2 key points that really landed on me. And really, the first one was 45% of surveyed executives say that, trusting their AI systems, they found very challenging. And the other one was that 70% of executives say they don't know how to govern algorithms. And so there's clearly a call to action here. And there's a lot of real work that has to be done. And when it comes to this space of AI and data ethics, we as data executives have a major role to play in addressing this. So to help out, we've recently launched an AI and Data Ethics Institute. And so we need to view this as an online resource for our clients. It's also in other interested parties. And it really provides access to 4 key things. One, a principle-based ethical decision framework to help organize and structure and guide our efforts in this space, making more ethical decisions with AI in our data. It's also a hub for thought leadership. And there's also in there ethics and action stories to really help bring to life how the organizations are successfully tackling this complex space. And we also provide materials to help raise awareness and deepen understanding of this space in the form of podcasts and other micro-learning. And so while through this institute, we is externally focused, it's also important to note that, and certainly, me as the Chief Data Officer and advisory, this is something we leverage internally within KPMG. Now, we do this to help educate and train our people in ethical decision-making. And this is important stuff so that they're prepared to embrace and really confront these types of issues as it pertains to the use of data and algorithms, especially in the work that we do for our clients. Now, the next slide, John, if we can go to, and I won't drain this, but it is kind of give you a sense of how we view this space. And, first off, when we sit down to collect all of this into a framework, we realized it really had to be actionable and holistic. And so it also really had to be positioned to really help guide and focus individuals to help unpack how to deal with these types of issues. And so there's really 4 things I want to highlight here around this framework. The first is the focus is action oriented, and it's really centered around recognizing the ethical issues, evaluating the impacts, and helping decide how to manage and finally take the right action involved. Second, it recognizes that the main components or the scope really that we're talking about is really data, algorithms, and the tools and technology, and they have to be looked at together. I think, historically, I think we have had a tendency to separate these into silos. The CIO looks at this, the CDO looks at this, and the algorithms kind of get ignored in the middle. But looking at these together is really critical. So we understand the supply chain. And when it comes to accountabilities, when it comes to measurement, that's absolutely essential. The third part I want you to take away is it recognizes the anchors to ethical actions and outcomes. There was a question earlier about culture. And it really, all of that starts with big picture core values. So equity, do no harm, dignity. I mean, the Archbishop in the keynote address also recognized the importance of these, and we certainly agree. And that's why we put these really at the center of the framework and how we approach it. And then lastly, the 4th point I want you to take away is that, this is principles and practices based. So, and that's critical to really help narrow the focus on how to take action. And these principles include creating fairness, managing bias, focused on building trust through transparency and protecting privacy, and really a deep look at the accountability systems of individuals. And a recognition that, law and standards are, while they're helpful and they're often very broad, they really are just guardrails, and they're just really the starting point in all of this. So with that said, I mean, all of this framework really helps to serve to structure the policy, the controls, the training, the measurement, and ultimately the building of culture that needs to be put in place. All right, so we've shared a lot of information on this topic so far, and this is not an easy area to get your arms around, but I'll leave you with 3 key points, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. First of all, this matters. It's a really important way that you can provide leadership to your organization and directly impact how your organization is perceived and trusted. The second point I want to make is that there are structured approaches and resources to help guide your journey. And like our AI and Data Ethics Institute and others that are out there, seek them out. And third and lastly, this is fundamentally about culture. This will take some time to build, and whether it starts with awareness and then starting to build deep skills in this space, but because it will take time, we need to start now. So with that said, let's pivot to questions in the 15 minutes we have left. Over to you, Derek.
Bob, thank you very much. And likewise, Sreekar and Allyson, really good content and thoughtfully put together. And certainly it's stimulated a bunch of questions that have come in. So let me take them one at a time. I think the first one's probably for you, Allyson, but Sreekar, Bob, feel free to chime in as well. Considering the 4 categories of risk that you've identified, and that was one of your slides, Alston, how do we ensure personal accountability for the decisions made or enabled by AI? Allyson, you may be on mute.
Yeah. We can chime in the interim while she figures the mic out. And Sreekar, I know you'll have some points of view on this too. I look at it as, and I'll do I'll take an internal view and be a little higher level, and then Sreekar can get more into the specifics. But it really starts by literacy, and Sreekar talked a lot about literacy. You have to make people aware of the surrounding environment and what the organizational expectations are and how that links back to culture. We also need to be clear on what good looks like in this space. And that's a hard thing to do, but you have to use a lot of different examples, and the examples have to be local and meaningful to the work that's being done. Whether it's someone that's a data scientist or someone that's supplying the data or providing the training experience for the algorithms. And then you really need to, so once you've introduced the literacy and made people aware, start measuring that and reporting that and having open discussion around progress. And then lastly, you start putting in some cases penalties in some cases. I mean, at a simple level, we do this around data privacy and data handling. And certainly that area is a lot more developed around this space. But it's really it is a journey. It's a process. It takes time. It isn't something that you can just flip the switch on. Is a sort of a key point I would make. Sreekar, do you want to go deeper in that?
Yeah, no, and I'll let Allyson speak after this also. I know she was trying to get off mute. So one thing I see, right? I mean, and also as my role in educating the next generation of data scientists that are coming through in the pipeline. One thing I missed out in my education was to show the overlap of the technology and the decision making, right? Today, we hire data scientists. I mean, my clients hire data scientists. I hire data scientists. They come, with a knowledge in their mind about the technical capability of AI, but they don't know. They haven't been exposed to the ideas of how do we take responsibility for the decision that the algorithm makes. I mean, I almost correlate a data scientist today to taking a kid into, a Toys R Us. I mean, I know Toys R Us is not there anymore, but a toy shop. They get to see all these algorithms, they get to experience all of these new things, and they come out giddy, right? These data scientists come out giddy from their education, wanting to apply this knowledge to everything around them. But what really ends up happening is when you bring them into the work environment, we have to show them that there is a responsible way of applying their knowledge to all of these capabilities. And how do we do that? I mean, obviously, this is not to be changed by the institutions. We need to do that early on, which, faculty like myself, we are trying to think about it very early on. How do we bring that on? But at an institution level, when we bring data scientists in, when we educate our leaders to hire data scientists, I think this is a very important piece of the process where we have to put in place how responsibility is handed down. Where does that algorithmic decision come through? And what is the accountability of the data scientist when they produce an answer? That is something that institutions should think about and put the right RACI around that, the responsible, actionable things. Yeah. Allyson, do you want to try now? Oh, there you go.
Okay,
yeah.
here we go. Great.
So I do maybe just want to add to that so how we institutionalize that, right? How do we institutionalize that accountability? Bob talked a little bit about, there's a literacy challenge, and I think Sreekar, touched on that too, of making sure across the life cycle that individuals are aware of the impacts of what they're building and what they're putting in place. Leadership needs to be aware of what parts in the process, right? The business process relying on an AI decision or an AI supported decision, and making sure that they understand, and which gets back to a little bit of the explainability. And we institutionalize that through exactly, Bob said a little bit of the controls, but I think it's also important when you're trying to drive innovation to look for opportunities to build it into performance metrics and provide a bit of the carrot in addition to the stick. So we don't want to too heavily focus on the negative aspects that tend to start to stifle that innovation, but also reward them for good models and really, high performing applications of these algorithms that start to move away from what maybe either allowing for different decisions to be made, increasing competitiveness in the market, those types of things, as well as, models that perform over time and those types of things, so that they're incented to do the right behaviors, not just being told what they can't do.
Like that. That really sounds, I'm sure that's going to resonate with a lot of people. So let's jump to the next one then. Ethics is culturally dependent, i.e. it has cultural bias. How do you see the ethical principles translate from one culture to the next with different views on what is good ethics? For example, democratic versus autocratic cultures. Interesting question. Who wants to grab that one?
That is a tough question, and I'll tell you how I look at this. And I mentioned in our framework at the center was a clear set of values. And so again, regardless of the broader culture, your organization needs to crystallize in their view what those core values are that you want to propagate through the ethical use of data and algorithms. And so it needs to start there. And that's as I say, that's a squishy discussion that is really critical to get cemented up front. And we spent, as an organization, just to give you guys a sense, probably close to, what was it, Alston, Sreekar, probably 6 months getting clear on a simplified, digestible view of what our values were that people could translate down into their day-to-day and into multiple scenarios. And so it really starts there, is the short answer.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. What we have seen in the marketplace is, to Bob's point, there is now a need for institutions to set in stone the culture as well as the value statements, and not just a statement, but really the initiative to ingest that. And when we think about institutions that are geographically distributed, they're operating in different countries, in different zones, they need to come to the table, not just with the values of one country, but the representative population and the diversity that exists within that organization. And this is actually, we are starting to see that, at least in our client group, within the ESG movement that is happening, we are seeing that there is a conversation that is coming through. Many of my US clients, this conversation around culture and ethics started in the EU part of their organization. And that has permeated now into China part of their organization, into India part of their organization. So now they're starting to get to that common base of what is it that we want to define from that ESG principle, which is where now investments are going heavily in the last year or year and a half. And I think that's going to accelerate even more. I mean, given where we are, especially the big tech conversations that is going on, the AI regulations conversation that's going on. How do we normalize? I mean, I haven't touched the whole data privacy regulations. I mean, CCPA, GDPR. When we talk about all of these things, there is a common thread of, and Allyson made a very good point, right? don't always approach this with a stake, right? I mean, when we talk about all of this, it seems like everything is a stake, but data science is resilient to new challenges. And we need to show our data scientists what are all the evolving challenges around culture, ethics, and so on. And I'm pretty sure we will take on the challenge and there will be new algorithms that will come through, just like how it has happened with explainability. Now we are seeing so many new frameworks come through for explainability that this is an area that we have to tackle and we have to invest.
Yeah, great points. Look, maybe I could follow up with another question that's just come in. How should we define transparency, and specifically algorithmic transparency going forward? Who wants to pick that up?
I can jump in as an academic in this space.
Yes.
One of the things that that is really exciting that I've seen come up is that when in the beginning everybody ran towards complexity. I mean, talk about deep learning, talk about all of these crazy new algorithms that were coming in. That complexity meant that explainability was hard, transparency was hard. Now there is a movement to say, it's okay to use a complex algorithm, but can you simplify it and show it to me through an analytical model that it can get close to that answer? If we can do that, then we will be able to justify the outcome of a complex model through an explainable process. And we may be able to get to the transparency that is required in terms of helping our decision makers make the decision faster. So there is a movement that is going on in that direction where we want to simplify the algorithms, make it easier for people to understand. But I also think that there is a role for business to play where they understand the outcomes without. They shouldn't blindly accept that this is the outcome of an algorithm when we trained it with a certain such and such model. I think it requires a holistic thought through on how the outcomes are affecting their business.
And maybe just to add on that for a moment, I think a lot of the emphasis on explainability, and I don't mean to minimize it because it's very, very important, but comes from an inherent lack of trust in the data, in the process, in what's being done. And so I think you need to solve it from both sides. You need to be able to really, get the organization comfortable with the data that's being used in a way that, that it starts to build that trust in the overall capability, not just the individual model. And then the explainability of the models themselves gets, some of that burden is taken off of that, and you start to have a little bit more, you're coming in from a more positive perspective than, well, I know we've had all these data issues in the past and you must have used that really bad data to do this, so this absolutely can't be true, right? You've got to work through the entire cycle of that trust to really solve the explainability problem.
Yeah, really, really good point there. Let's see, we've got a couple minutes left here. Let's see if we can shoehorn a couple more of these questions in. And by the way, thanks to the participants, there's been a steady stream. So this is obviously an interesting hot topic here. One of the questions just popped up is there an AI algorithm for identifying bias and ethical issues?
I don't think there is a silver bullet out there.
Oh, no.
No, I mean, I think Allyson touched upon it, right? I mean, trust is a very important factor in everything that needs to be done inside organizations now, especially around data as well as algorithms. So I hope I wish there was an easy answer to this problem. It's not.
Right.
At least in my experience, it's not.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. I think probably the question was a little bit tongue-in-cheek there. It's like throwing up your hands in the air and saying, "Oh, can someone save me?" But yeah, look, I think that we can close off on that note. This topic is obviously a topic that needs a lot of thoughtful attention by every organization. whether you're a global organization or a local organization, it's equally applicable. And there are no silver bullets, but you gotta get started and focus on it holistically. So thank you very much for the message that you guys have brought to the audience, and thanks to the audience for the participation. Obviously, the conversation goes on beyond this. I encourage everyone to continue to use the chats in the Hoover platform, let's continue the dialogue. And then just thanks very much to KPMG. Thanks very much to Sreekar, Alston, Bob, for your insights, and enjoy the rest of this day.